So I'd like to really welcome everyone who's participating in this webinar. This first webinar of the TUMIVolt Charging Station in 2021 it is. And I'm very glad that you joined us for another webinar of this series where we cover a broad range of e-mobility topics. And we are running this webinar format in the GIZ project TUMIVolt, Urban Mobility from Renewable Energy. And this project is funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Today, we are really excited to be sharing a webinar on the topic of public charging infrastructure tendering. But first, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Marvin Stolz, and I'll be moderating today's session. And I work as Transport Policy Advisor for the global GIZ project TUMIVolt, the one I mentioned before. And there we focus on the improvement of framework conditions for sustainable electric mobility in the global south. And now for the beginning, I'd suggest that we have a quick look on the agenda for this episode. And first I'll quickly introduce our expert speaker, Laurens van Mourik from EV Consult. And then he has the chance to enlighten us about the details of public charging infrastructure and charging infrastructure tendering for about 30 minutes. And after that, we'll be having a live Q&A session, which my colleague Victor Valente will moderate. So now I'm very happy to welcome Laurens van Mourik onto our virtual open speaker podium. Laurens works as senior consultant and e-mobility expert at EV Consult, which is an independent consultancy and project management company for electric vehicle projects based in the Netherlands. And some of Laurens' projects include the development of a fast charging network in China and Singapore, also the implementation of public and semi-public fast charging infrastructure in Amsterdam, which we'll also present to us later, and as well as electrifying various car and bus fleets. So I think with you, we have a passionate fighter for the transition to zero-emission transport and also an expert for charging infrastructure at the same time here in our webinar. So a very warm welcome from my side to you, Laurens.
Thank you very much.
And you're welcome. And before I hand over to you, just let me say a couple of sentences to the topic and also give some info on logistics for our participants. So first of all, as many of you know, e-mobility is, together with renewable energy, of course, is one key building block to decarbonize our transport systems. But almost as equally important as the electric vehicles is that you have the right charging infrastructure in place. And in this area, the topic can get a bit complicated for decision makers who want to electrify their public fleets, for example, like e-buses, etc. And the same, of course, goes for local authorities who want to scale up the available number of public charging stations throughout their city. So when you look at the possible charging technologies, you have a lot of differences or different options like AC or DC charging, fast and slow charging, conductive or inductive charging, etc., etc. I don't want to go into the details, but I just want to say, to tender the right equipment which will power your public e-bus fleet or supply your city center with public charging infrastructure can be a challenging task. And that's why we hope to get a good overview from Laurens on this topic today. And now I come to the logistics before I hand over to you, Laurens. Two more things. First, to ensure transparency in terms of data protection to our participants, we will record today's webinar as always and upload it to the TUMI YouTube channel afterwards. And there you will be able to find all previous episodes of the charging station online. We will also post the link in the chat. And as always, feel free to use the question function on your dashboard on the right to raise your questions during the presentation and of course afterwards. And after the presentation, Victor will redirect all questions to Laurens so that we can have interactive Q&A part of this webinar. So this would be it from my side, and with that, I would kindly hand over to you, Laurens, by giving you the possibility to share your screen. And then I would say the stage is yours, and thank you very much for presenting.
Cool. Thank you very much, Marvin. I hope everybody can see my screen. Already Marvin did a short introduction of myself. I've been working as a e-mobility expert for TUMIVolt for the last 6 years. And the last 6 years, a lot has happened. It started with small tendering projects for just pilot projects, pilot charging infrastructure within cities. And now we are really in the scale-up phase in some countries and some cities. So first there was just a tender for 10 or 20 chargers, and now we are talking about thousands of chargers in one tender. So a lot has happened, but we're still at the beginning, and there's still a lot to do. And I'm happy to share my knowledge about this topic. If there are any questions, just feel free to ask them in the question section in this GoToWebinar, and I will just discuss them afterwards. And if there are more questions and when there's not enough time in this webinar, please feel free to send me or Marvin a question. So about TUMIVolt, we started 10 years ago. We are working from Amsterdam. We're based in Amsterdam, but we are working worldwide. We are a growing team, now about 25 e-mobility experts. Everybody is has a full-time focus on e-mobility, and all our projects have a real strong focus on charging infrastructure. So that where the e-mobility market and the energy market comes together, that's where our specialty is. So the agenda for today, I will briefly discuss the market trends and developments, and then go deeper into the charging techniques, give an example of successful charging networks, how they have been built up, what the approach was, and what tools we can use to develop successful charging networks, and how to tender it. And I also discussed the topic of bus technologies and the chargers, the needed charging technology for buses in particular. So the market trends and developments, I think it's clear for all. There is an exponential growth in electric vehicles. It's a global trend, and we do it because of climate change, for CO2 reductions, and especially also for the air quality improvements. But one important part is also cost reductions. It's just e-mobility is becoming more and more financial competitive with conventional mobility, and that's because there's a large development in battery technology. So the decline of battery prices is an important development, and also the increase of energy density makes it possible that batteries will be used in not only light electric vehicles, but also in passenger cars and in heavy transport and buses. So we're just at the beginning, and like I said, it's not only light electric vehicles, but also passenger cars, buses, and heavy transport. The outlook now is that almost 70% of the global bus fleet will be electric in 2040. But all those different segments need charging infrastructure, and they all need different types of charging infrastructure. So we need to think about how and where to implement the chargers. And for the light electric vehicles, those have the not really strong impact on the electricity grid. So you can use the existing energy supply. But for passenger cars, passenger vehicles, and commercial vehicles, buses, and heavy transport, those all have a very large impact on the electricity grid. So we need to think about where to place the chargers. So my focus in this webinar will be the charging infrastructure for passenger vehicles and larger. so passenger vehicles and buses and heavy transport. So the need for charging infrastructure is clear, but you have to place them where the vehicles are parked. Over 70% of citizens do not have their own parking facility, and also cars are parked over 95% of the time. So where the cars and the vehicles are parked, that's the location where you have to install charging infrastructure. And public charging infrastructure is a key condition for a successful transition towards e-mobility. But there are a lot of different techniques. So where to charge the cars? Like I said, 95% of the time the cars are parked. And then you can use that time to charge the vehicles. So that's used for normal charging. You have a lot of time to charge the vehicle, and the impact on the electricity grid is less than for fast charging. Fast charging is also needed, so it's not a decision if you have to choose between normal charging or fast charging. It's always a combination. Fast charging is also needed for on-the-road charging when you have to drive larger distances, and also for specific target groups. For example, frequent road users like the taxi market, they need fast chargers to be able to drive their normal routes on a day. So where to place them? On private space, can be at work or at your home, or on public space, because not everybody has their own parking facilities. Also in parkings and on the road. All those locations are interesting for installing charging infrastructure. And you have always the question, there are not a lot of cars yet, so why do I have to install chargers? But also, if you install chargers, you need the cars. So it's a chicken and egg question. If you look at the successful public charging networks, it always started with developing a charging infrastructure, so it's able for people to make the transition towards e-mobility. And then a bit of background between the charging technique. You have the AC charging, alternative current, and DC charging, the direct current chargers. The DC charging is mainly used for fast charging. That's high voltage charging with power over 50 kilowatts till now 350 kilowatts. Those are used for on-the-road charging. So frequent road users use them, and it's also good for the range anxiety, that people are not afraid that they empty their battery within a day. They can use the fast chargers. Normal charging is low voltage charging. Normally we see that the chargers have a maximum power capacity of 22 kilowatts, and over 90% of the charging session at the moment of e-drivers is AC charging. But still you need both AC and DC charging. Then I will give the example of Amsterdam. That's the largest public charging network mainly available. 10 years ago, we started with a pilot for just 100 public charge points. Then 5 years later, there was a tender for 1,250 charge points, and now there are over 4,000 public AC charge points. So they're all in public space. And there are also 100 DC fast chargers in public space. And the approach of Amsterdam was first to select strategic locations for the 100 first chargers. And also they used the charger follows car approach. So everybody who wanted to drive an electric car was able to apply for a charger, a public charger. If you're not able to charge your car at home, then you could apply for a charger in public space. And the municipality, the city of Amsterdam, is expanding the network. So more and more chargers were installed in public space. And the network density was a maximum of 200 meters, but now you also see that multiple chargers are installed within small distances. Not only the charger follows car approach is used by the city of Amsterdam, but there's also a strong data-driven rollout. And I think that's very important to just look at the existing chargers. If you install your first chargers, look at the usage of the chargers and then expand the network based on where there's high demand for charging. And so that's very important when tendering the charging infrastructure. Use the right protocols and open protocols to make it possible to look into the data to see what happens with the chargers and when and where to expand the network. This is the data of Amsterdam, of the charging network. This is the most recent data available. Over the past 5 years, you see the charging sessions grew steadily. And in the beginning of 2020, there was a dip in the charging sessions and in the active users. That's all due to the COVID, the Corona crisis. But we just see it as a temporary effect. And already we see a rise in the number of charging sessions, the number of kilowatt hours used, and also the number of charging stations is increasing rapidly. So this data is essential to be able to develop a successful charging network. But if you do not have a charging network yet, what is the approach for developing one? There are some basic rules, and the basis is just make a detailed analysis of the charging demand. What is the current demand and how will it develop in the upcoming years? There are some good tools, some strategic prognosis maps which can be used to make a detailed analysis of a city. And then based on location criteria, you can define a local, to define a basic grid. And with that grid, you can roll out the network further. So first you use a core grid with a maximum distance, and then you define expansion grid criteria. First, for example, if someone drives electric, you can expand the public network by installing an extra charger within the proximity of the address of the citizen which is going to drive electric, but also based on the prognosis, which can be made quite good at the moment. You can just make a detailed charging network for the upcoming years. So the expansion by charger follows the car based on the prognosis per neighborhood and data driven. And then you also can install dedicated chargers for frequent road users. For example, the taxi fleet, if they will make the transition towards e-mobility, they need specific chargers, fast chargers at specific locations. The same as buses. I will discuss the topic of public electric buses later in this presentation, and heavy transport as well. So, like I briefly discussed, there are some good tools to define the charging demand. Based on demographic data, the number of people, income, age, education, work, number of vehicles within a certain area, number of visitors, is it an attractive location or not? You can make a detailed map of the charging demand. And the results, depends on the availability of data. But in the Netherlands, we use a diameter of 250 meters. And for every single area with a diameter of 250 meters, we can make a prediction of the charging demand at the moment. But we also can make a prognosis for 2022, 2025, and even for 2030. And we will adapt those prognoses on a yearly basis. So those tools make it very easy and help. This is really helpful to make a successful and develop a successful network with chargers. Also, the rollout plan can be used based on these maps. So you can select interesting location for the chargers. You can install the chargers where there is need for a charger. And when there is high usage of the chargers, you can install extra charger within that area. So, and also, if you use the open protocols, you also have the availability of the data that comes from the chargers. So if you click on the map on the charger which is installed, you can see what the usage of the last period on that charger is. So if you know what you want to develop to make a basis network with chargers, then you can start a tendering process. And there are some important parameters. So first you have to define the scope. What are the responsibilities of the municipality and what are the responsibilities of the contractor? So if you already selected the locations, then those are fixed. And then you want the responsibilities for the contractor to make a grid connection, purchase the charger, to install the charger, to have a maintenance and operation contract for the chargers, to deliver the energy and sell energy for the customers, and also have operation and management on those chargers. What we see currently is that there's a minimum term of contract of 7 to 10 years, more or less, for the AC public chargers. And the number of chargers is normally based on the prognosis. And many municipalities, they use a maximum tariff per kilowatt hours. And also in the contract, you need to define the service levels. So what is the service that has to be delivered by the contractor? And the ownership of the data in the contracts, in the tenders we did, all ownership lies within the municipality. So the data is generated by the public chargers, and the contractor shares the data with the municipality, so the municipality can use that data to make an efficient network and expand the network. So use the open protocols, and at the end of the contract, you can find, as a municipality, you can find a new operator for those chargers. So at the end of the contract, the ownership of the charger goes to the municipality, and the municipality can just find a new operator, so that you still have a successful network also after the contract duration. If we look at a business case, many cities use concession contracts. So the contractor has costs, fixed costs, as the hardware, the charger, the grid connection, but there are also recurring costs, also grid recurring costs, operation and maintenance, and energy. And the income for the concession, for the contractor, is selling the energy. Well, at the beginning, there are not a lot of cars yet. So then the income is relatively small. So if we look at the graph at the right side of this slide, the first tenders we did in 2008, every city had to pay the contractor at least $2,000 to install a charger, and that's per charger. But when this transition to e-mobility came up rapidly, and more cars were charging at the public chargers, the business case for the concession, the contractor, was becoming better and better. And now we see, for example, in Amsterdam, in the large cities where there is a lot of usage, that the business case is very good, and that now the CPO, the charge point operator, pays the cities to install a charger, to have the right to sell energy to the customers. So at the beginning, to speed up this transition, there was a lot of subsidies needed to develop this charging infrastructure. And now when there is a basic grid and there's a lot of usage, then we see that that it's becoming better and better. And now, and now we see that there's a positive business case. Then I will go to electric buses, because for bus fleets, we see that municipalities have a large influence. So you see a rapid transition towards electric buses. It goes more rapidly than the transition towards electric passenger cars. And to decide how to make the transition, we have to look at the different techniques, the main bus technologies. First of all, you have the conventional fuels, diesel buses. Then we went to the transition fuels, the compressed natural gas and hybrid electric. But now we see that most of the buses choose for zero emission, tail to pipe, for battery electric buses. And then you can decide to go for charging just at the depot, at one location, or charging the battery electric bus also at bus stops. That's called opportunity charging. The third one is in-motion charging. So via catenary, you can charge a bus, or you can use inductive charging. Inductive charging is still very much in the pilot phase, the same as hydrogen buses. So most developments we see at the full electric buses using a pantograph or a plug-in charger. So the charging techniques I just discussed, you can charge with a regular plug at AC, or you can use DC charger. You can fast charge the bus. The advantage is that you have lower investment costs, and there's not a lot of impact on urban space, because you only need charging infrastructure at the depot and not at the bus stops. The disadvantage is that you have range limitations, because you can only charge at this specific and at the specific depots, and you have larger charging times. And that's why you see a lot of electric buses which use a pantograph. Then you can use use a fast charger to charge the buses. You can also use them on the depot, but also you can use a pantograph charger at the bus stops. The benefits is that you have shorter charging times. You need a smaller battery, so the bus itself has less costs. The charging infrastructure itself has higher investment costs. And then induction, I will skip because it's still in a pilot phase, as well as hydrogen. Trolley buses which use a catenary, they can charge the bus while they're in motion. The disadvantage is also you have high investment costs and high electricity costs. If you look at the global electric bus markets, we see that the largest electric bus fleet is now in China. The developments in China are going very, very fast, but there is there's a worldwide transition. Am I still sharing my screen? Oh, yeah. Sorry. But also in the rest of the world, we see a lot of electric buses coming up, and the electric bus fleet or the bus fleet worldwide will become more and more fully electric. And then you have to choose between depot charging and opportunity charging. So charging at the depot or charging at bus stops, or a combination between the two. If you look at the load profile, the two graphs we see on this slide, on both scenarios, you start with 100% charge. So the battery is fully charged when you leave the depot. At depot charging, you just empty the battery during the day, and in the evening, when you're back at the depot, you use the night to charge the battery again. For opportunity charging, you also can charge the battery at bus stops. So your range is higher. You can drive more kilometers per day, or you can use a smaller battery. And it's not a question that one is better than the other. Every project is different, so you really have to look at the different characteristics of the bus routes and the urban space to decide for what you're going. So what to choose? The parameters to define the right hardware is first the characteristics of the bus routes, the daily distances, trip distances, the schedule, how much time do you have at the bus stops, and is it possible to install a charger there? What is the capacity of the bus, the number of passengers which you have to move? What is possible in urban space, so urban planning, where can you install chargers? And how does the local energy grid looks like? So, like I said, every project has its own technical characteristics. You have projects where you use plug-in chargers, projects where you use a pantograph, catenary, hydrogen, all those different techniques you see all around the world. Yeah, the battery capacity and charging power is all dependent of the different projects. If you look at examples, in Amsterdam, there are 100 buses which use only depot charging via a pantograph. I go through those slides a bit quicker due to the time. But in China, there are over 16,000 full electric buses, and they all use plug-in depot charging. This is in Shenzhen, it's the largest electric bus fleet. Then you have also an example in Chile, where they use depot charging with 411 electric buses. And in Marrakesh, you see that there is an in-motion charging via catenary, and there they use 15 electric buses. So it's not a question what is the best, but what is the best per project. Hydrogen buses are still in pilot phase. There are some pilots, but not on large scale yet. If you look at tendering, first is to define the stakeholders and the roles. Then use the triple layer model to define the right conditions. So look at the routes, look at urban planning, and look at what is possible from a grid perspective, and then construct smart tender documents and start the tendering process. So first of all, the stakeholders. When you look at tendering bus infrastructure, there's something new, two new roles entered when we decide to go for battery electric buses, where first the municipality had to deal with a public transport authority and the public transport operator. Now we also have to take into account that there need to be charging infrastructure, so there needs to be a charge point operator, and the buses have impact on the local electricity grid, so we need to deal also with the distribution system operator. So cooperation at an early stage is essential when developing charging infrastructure for electric buses. Like I said, we use the triple layer model to define where and what charging infrastructure need to be installed. So look at the charging demand, look at urban planning, and look at the electricity grid. So the first one is develop charging scenarios. define the current and future routing based on transport demand. So what are the bus routes? Where do they stop? What is the demand? Where do they have to charge? What are the trip distances? And then you can define what the configuration of the buses have to be. What batteries are needed? What chargers do you need? And then you can look at the different charging scenarios. So if you go only for overnight charging, you probably need a larger battery size, but you need less chargers because you only need chargers at the depot. But you also can go for opportunity charging in combination with depot charging. Then you need a smaller battery size, but then you need chargers at the depot, but also chargers at the bus stops. Those scenarios you work out in smart maps we use. We use urban planning for it, the same as we use for the regular chargers for the passenger cars. We can define where the charging demand is biggest and also to see where there is space to place a charger. A pantograph is quite a big charger, so you need urban space to install it. And you not only need a pantograph, but also you need a transformer. So depend on the power, you need to have urban space to install it at the bus stop. The third layer is also look at the grid connections. Where is the local energy grid? Where's the low voltage grid, the high voltage grid, and where can you install the chargers? What is possible from a grid operator perspective? We use those three layers not only for the bus infrastructure, but also to look where you have to install regular charging infrastructure. So you can make a combination with other charging infrastructure. If you have a large grid connection, if there's not a bus charging at the bus stop, you can use that grid connection to charge other vehicles, cars, heavy transport, and so on. So if you looked at those three layers, you can define which technique you want to use in the market. There is one big risk, and that's the risk of vendor lock-in. So you have to define clearly at the beginning of the stage what charging technique is most suitable for the project. And then the tendering of the buses and charging infrastructure, you can tender it together. So both the buses and the charging infrastructure in one tender or separately. There's one thing that the infrastructure of the charger has a longer lifetime normally than the bus itself and the hardware of the bus. So if you do tender the bus and infra at once, then you have larger investment costs at an early stage, while you also can tender it separately, but then you need, you always need to be clear about what protocols you use. And you have to use open protocols that you have interoperability. So if the public transport operator, the contract of the public transport operator ends and a charging infrastructure is still in place, that you can change from operator and change from buses, and that you don't have a vendor lock-in. So now I go to the conclusion. The global transition towards 100% electric mobility just started, but we need to install charging infrastructure. And to install charging infrastructure is a key condition for success. And it's not a question about what charging infrastructure you need. We normally need normal chargers for cars, so they can charge the car while they're parked. You need fast chargers for frequent road users, for taxis, but also for people to drive longer distances. And you need dedicated chargers for buses and heavy transport. So this is, in short, an introduction about tendering infrastructure. I hope that you all enjoyed the knowledge shared. And if there are any questions, please feel free. I think we're now going to the Q&A. If there are questions afterwards, just send me or Marvin a question, and I will answer those later in the later stage as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Laurens, for this insightful presentation. And with that, I would already hand over to Victor, who will now take over the moderation for the question and answer part of this webinar. Thank you again.
Thank you, Laurens. I think we had a great presentation here. For me, it was very enlightening. I have already also many questions in the dashboard, so I'll just kick it off. The first question, are you aware of any functioning country-wide battery swapping scheme for two-wheelers?
Yeah, I know that there are battery swapping projects. I think in China there's quite a large battery swapping project. Like I said, my main expertise is on passenger cars, public transport buses, and so on, because those have a larger impact on the electricity grid. So I'm not sure, I'm not involved in any projects related to battery swapping. I know a few years ago there was a pilot for battery swapping for passenger cars. That was not successful. For light electric vehicles, I can assume that it could be successful, but I do not have details on that project. I can ask my colleagues if we have some more information on that, but I'm not sure where. I cannot name any successful projects for battery swapping, but I know for scooters, for two-wheelers, there are some projects worldwide which are using battery swapping.
Okay, other questions here. What are the key aspects in AC charger requirements?
Yeah, for AC charging, that's called regular charging. So most of the charging is done by an AC charger, and that's because the power is less than for DC charger. With a DC charger, you can use higher powers, but a car is parked for a long time. Like I said, mostly a car is parked for over 95% of the time. So when using an AC charger, you have a lot of time to fill the battery. And there are, and the AC chargers are most of the chargers which are used now in public space, but also in private space at people's homes or at work. And there are a lot of there's a lot of standardization and protocols to use. So the plug is the first one. Mainly used with AC charging is the Mannekes plug, the Type 2 Mode 3 plug. But you also can use a regular Schuko plug, but then the charging power is even less. So then you have to require a lot of time to charge up the vehicle. But when charging larger batteries for personal passenger cars and so on, it's important to use the open protocols. OCPP and OCPI are the two main protocols used when using AC charging infrastructure. And that's also to gather the information, the data from the charger itself. So it's able to use smarter charging. So not only charging when you plug in the vehicle, but you also can just use an app for steering the charger, the charging curve. So if there's more energy available, you can charge at a higher power. When there's less energy available, you charge at a lower power. So it's important if you use AC charging infrastructure at large scale that you use those open protocols, that in future you also can use smart charging for it.
Thanks. I see two questions here. I think they can be asked together actually. One is, how do you see the issue of monopolistic markets in the case of concession agreements, or example where only one CPO is operating? And the second question is, you described the setup in Amsterdam, but I imagine that there are different models in terms of division of roles between investors, CPOs, and public authorities, so the ownership. In this sense, could you please elaborate on that, and also give some example where you could avoid maybe this monopoly, and or incentivize that you have a market where you have more operators, or even if it's better to rely on the, or if it is a natural monopoly? If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, good question. In a concession, you normally have one contractor. So instead, at the beginning, you have charging stations from one contractor, which and therefore you have the risk for that there's a monopoly. That's why in the concession agreements for most of the cities which I was involved in, there was a maximum kilowatt-hour tariff used, so that they are not able to just ask a lot of money per kilowatt-hour. So in Amsterdam, it's 35 cents per kilowatt-hour, for example. But this concession, it started with a concession of 100 charging points. After a year, there was need for more chargers. So then they started a new concession, and another contractor won that concession. So there were then two contractors active in the market. Then 2 years later, another concession came on the market, and another contractor won it. So now in Amsterdam, for example, there are 5 different contractors which are operating the charging infrastructure. What is also possible in another city where we just started, we made a concession and we made we made a division between 2 contracts. So we made 2 contracts within one concession. So it was not possible to win the complete tender for one contractor, so that it was able that from start on there were 2 different contractors active for operating the public charging network. So that's also a possibility. But normally, since the charging network is expanding and expanding and expanding, every 1 or 2 years there's a new tender for expanding the network, and new contractors are able to win the tender. So there's always a risk of a monopoly, but in most of the cities, we see now that there are multiple contractors active. I think there was also a second question. Could you repeat that one?
No, the second one was about Amsterdam. So, so the division of roles between investors, CPOs, and public authorities ownership. Could you please elaborate more on that? If you have more examples, and the example of Amsterdam as well. Yeah.
No, for the ownership, like I said, there's a concession model where the ownership of the charger during the contract period lies within the responsibility of the CPO, so of the charge point operator. But during that period, all communication is done by the contractor. So the city of Amsterdam just gave everything to the market. So in the concession agreements, they made agreements about service levels, about how to install the chargers, and they have a controlling function. So the municipality is just controlling it, and the entire contract is operated. The charging network is operated by the contractor. At the end of the contract, so after 7 years or 10 years, it depends on the concession, sometimes 7, sometimes 10 years in Amsterdam, the ownership of the charge point goes to the city of Amsterdam. So the city of Amsterdam gets the charger itself, and then they are tendering this a service on the charger, again, will tender that. So they will find a new operation and maintenance and operation contract. So
okay.
yeah, the ownership lies of the hardware lies within the city, and all service is done by external contractors.
Another question here relating to how to choose the right solution. The question is, I understand you spoke about space available in each charging solution for public transport. There is a kind of experience which relates to the charging solution with the route exchange or maybe topography. For instance, recommendation short routes to use opportunity charging.
Yeah, it really depends on the project. So for every project, we normally make different scenarios, different variants, where we look at the impact of, for example, using only depot charging, and a scenario where we use depot charging in combination with opportunity charging. And what you normally see when there's not a lot of space for opportunity charging within cities, or they look at different routes for the buses. So can we change the routes of the buses so that we make bus stops at locations where there is space for a charger? Sometimes it's not possible, and then the buses need a larger battery. So if you have a larger battery, then you can sometimes, it's enough to only use depot charging, and you do not need opportunity charging. But then you have a larger battery, more weight, sometimes less capacity of transporting people. Sometimes then you need an extra bus to have the same amount of people that you can move. So it really depends on the project. But normally we look at the 3 layers, and then we look at the different scenarios, what is possible. And also it has a large impact on the investments which have to be made.
Sure.
But I cannot say like, okay, this is the right solution. It's really depending on every project. And that's also why you see the different techniques. In China, you have opportunity charging routes. You have buses with only depot charging. Sometimes you use the catenary in motion charging. It's really depending on the local electricity grid, the routings, available space, and so on.
Okay. Another question here regarding the charging tariffs. So in Germany, the end user charging tariffs don't seem to be regulated. How is this being handled in other countries? Do you have any examples?
Yeah, charging tariffs is it's a difficult question because the charge point operators need to earn money through the consumption of energy. And at the beginning, the charging infrastructure, the investments are quite high. So if they want to have a positive business case, they need to ask high kilowatt-hour prices. But if you want to make a successful transition towards e-mobility, then some municipalities, some cities say, okay, it's not possible to ask more than 35 cents per kilowatt hour, for example, what most cities in the Netherlands did. But also, then the business case is not positive for the contractors. So then the city of Amsterdam paid in the past like around 2,000 euros per charger in order to make that contract profitable for the contractor. And now when there's there are more chargers, and when there is a lot of usage, and there are more charge point operators active within each proximity, then you have then the the driver can decide to go to charge point A or charge point B. So then it comes to a more mature market, and then it's possible to leave that maximum tariff and just go and let it over to the market. But in the beginning, to kickstart a transition, it's good to have a maximum, because otherwise you can see in some markets that they ask really high kilowatt-hour tariffs, and that people are not going to make that transition towards e-mobility.
Marvin, one question: how many questions can we still have? I don't know.
Yeah,
because I see that we are many here in the chat. So
Laurens, if you're okay to go 5 minutes longer, then we can do that. And so let's have like 3 or 4 more questions, if that's possible, Victor.
Great.
Yeah,
okay,
no problem.
so thanks. So what is the minimum charging points to be feasible for a contractor? I know this varies, but if you have a magical number that could be shared, this is the question.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, that really also depends on the city, on the number of electric vehicles that are already active or available in the city. It depends on the prognosis. What do we expect to happen in the near future? So, yeah, some cities, they decide if they go from scratch on, they want to develop a charging infrastructure network. They say, let's start with a basic grid, and sometimes they use a distance between the chargers of about 500 meters, sometimes 1,000 meters, so that that you can decide, and then you just install the chargers to make a grid over the city, that within 500 meters you always have, for example, a charger available. And then you also can obtain data from those chargers to see where the charging demand is highest, and then install more chargers where the demand is high. So that is the possibility how to start installing a charging network. But a magical number is unfortunately not available.
Yeah. Okay. I have an interesting question here regarding energy loss. Are charging losses significant in terms of their relative magnitude to the total amount of energy needed to recharge batteries? And how do charging losses differ between depot and opportunity combined and opportunity only charging?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. No, the question is related to the charging losses. Yeah. So what is the relative magnitude to the total amount of energy needed? So the percentage of energy loss, and compared between the different technologies. So depot with opportunity and only opportunity charging. If you...
Yeah. No, yeah, charging is very efficient. So the charging via plug has almost no energy losses. Also via pantograph, then it's really the energy losses is less than 1%. If you go to, for example, inductive charging, then you have larger energy losses. Also, when you go to in-motion charging, how much the exact energy loss is, I'm not sure. But normally when you charge via a plug, it's neglectable. It's almost no energy loss. So all energy produced can be used in the vehicle itself. Both AC and DC charging, there's no difference in energy loss between the two. Also, if you use a pantograph which connects the vehicle with the charger, then there's almost no energy loss.
So in terms of operational costs, which technology has a higher cost, trolley or pantograph?
Normally a trolley has normally higher costs, because then you need more infrastructure. So the infrastructure, the initial investments are higher, but on the other hand, the buses itself need a smaller battery. And so on the longer term, also you see that the buses itself, the hardware, have less investments. But normally if you look at the hardware itself, it's about 2 times the cost of a diesel bus, and that's for an electric bus with a battery of 300 kilowatt hours, more or less. It also depends on the specifications of the project. In motion, and a trolley bus is cheaper, but the infrastructure is way more expensive. So that has a really large impact on the business case.
Well, just maybe the last question then, or a broader question. What do you see as the main challenges or bottlenecks to really spread as e-mobility or EVs in the world, and how PCI play a role in this process?
Yeah, no, I think most important challenge is the electricity grid, especially for buses. In some countries, you have a really developed electricity grid, but in many countries, it's not that stable, and you need a real stable electricity grid in order to make that transition possible. Also, I see that electric mobility is also the solution for it. So it's a bit 2 ways, because you need a lot of batteries in order to make the grid stable, especially with more and more sustainable energy. The energy is produced not always when you want it, so you need to store the energy, and then you need a lot of batteries. But standalone batteries are quite expensive. But if you have a lot of batteries in the cars, then it's a car, and you also can use that as a second function to balance the electricity grid. If you have a large installed base of electric vehicles, you can use just a percentage of every vehicle which is connected to a charge point to charge a bus, for example, when high power is needed. So I think electromobility is also the solution for its main challenge, and the main challenge is this, the electricity grid and how stable it is, and how much impact it has. But also, since 95% of the time an electric vehicle is just parked, you can use all those hours to charge it. You can also charge the vehicles when there's a lot of electricity available. During the night, just at midnight, when not a lot of people use energy, you can charge the cars instead of charging it just all at the same time. So.
Thanks. Well, we could not go through all the questions, but as you mentioned, we're gonna forward it to you. And I see the colleagues from GIZ that I saw, I avoid some questions because then it's easy also to read to you afterwards. So yeah. Sorry for that. And thank you very much for this question and for answering those questions. It was very interesting. Thank you. Marvin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to both of you for this Q&A, of course. And Laurens, again, thank you very much for giving us your time and presenting this and your expert views on how to tender the charging infrastructure and how to prepare the charging infrastructure tenders for different purposes, e-buses on the one hand and electric passenger cars on the other hand. So last word to our participants, a big thank you for joining, and also stay with us 5 minutes longer than planned. And thank you for all your questions. As Victor said, we will try to answer the ones we haven't addressed so far. And of course, if you want to learn more about the TUMI and our initiative, you can follow us on all our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, of course. And yeah, with that, I hope you enjoyed this webinar. And of course, we invite you to stay tuned and follow us for our future episodes. We will, of course, keep you posted about upcoming topics very soon. And on that note, I'm saying thank you very much again and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.